This is lesson 17.4, the debate over urban guilds. What were guilds, and why did they become controversial in the 18th century? College Board topic 4.3, the Enlightenment. Economic, political, and cultural factors have influenced the form and status of family, class, and social groups in European history, which has in turn affected both the individual and society. Explain the causes and consequences of Enlightenment thought on European society from 1648 to 1815. Mercantilist theory and practice were challenged by new economic ideas, including Adam Smith's, which espoused free trade and a free market. So Adam Smith is the big hero of this presentation. Still around England, Adam Smith was Scottish, highly influential in other places as well, including America and other parts of Europe, like France. Key concepts of the debate over urban guilds: the guild system, economic liberalism, the invisible hand, and laissez-faire. There is our man Adam Smith right there. And here's a picture of some people working, but they don't look like they're working in a house, do they? There's some kind of a sign up there with some kind of notification on there, maybe some kinds of rules. Doesn't look like it's somebody's house anymore. So much for cottage industry. Intro. So last time we talked about the explosive growth of rural industry. There had been a time when rural people farmed and urban people made things, and that was great. Urban cities had this guild system to keep everything under control. Guilds controlled quality. They kept standards good, but not too good. Guilds controlled who was making the goods. They kept undesirables like women and day laborers and Jews and foreigners out. Guilds controlled the amount being made, in other words, the supply. And guilds controlled competition among themselves. And guilds gave you an identity. But then the agricultural revolution began in the Low Countries and in England and spread from there. It was fueled, as we found out, by the Columbian Exchange and by the scientific revolution. And a major component of this revolution was the enclosure movement. The enclosure movement caused job displacement for thousands upon thousands of rural agricultural workers. And this displacement created a surplus labor supply for a new cottage industry, or as our textbook likes to call it, the industrious revolution. Rural, non-guild workers were producing all kinds of consumer goods in their homes, and these goods were being sold commercially by urban merchants. And all of this was bad news for urban trade guilds because they had no control over what was happening way out there in the country. And don't forget, there's a growing food supply, there's an exploding population, and there's a growing consumer market. And you've got this guy named Adam Smith coming out and saying to these urban guilds, nobody needs you around. You could all disappear tomorrow and nobody would even miss you. What you do does not help people. In fact, what you do can be downright pernicious. You stifle talented people. You obstruct technical innovation, and you kill healthy competition. We talked about urban guilds when we discussed the Renaissance, and even in our summer reading room. Urban guilds basically regulated trade and industry. Urban guilds originated in Europe around 1200 as the European economy started to grow again after centuries of feudalism. And we've already seen that Louis XIV's Controller General, financial wizard and devout mercantilist Jean-Baptiste Colbert loved guilds. He thought that they ensured quality, and for him, high quality could be used to justify high import tariffs that were central to mercantilism. And we talked all about that in chapter 14. And you could also tax guilds' dues. And Colbert wanted to create more guilds, and the number of guilds in Paris, for example, doubled from 1672 to 1691. How can you use guilds to restrict competition? Well, you can throw up trade barriers. You can restrict access to raw materials through guilds. You can allow only Christians and sometimes only Catholics to be guild members. You can require a certain number of years of experience before becoming a member. You can require members' fees. You can require submission of a masterpiece to attain guild membership. You can keep guild membership in the family. You can pass restrictions on training and hiring. And this is the best part: the laws and the court system will enforce these measures. So Adam Smith and what we call economic liberalism. Adam Smith lived from 1723 to 1790. And Adam Smith was one of our Enlightenment thinkers. He published his landmark book, Wealth of Nations, in 1776. And he did for economics what guys like John Locke and Montesquieu did for government. And what he did was this: he applied scientific observation and reason to show how wealth was actually created. And Smith discovered that mercantilism was actually wrong. Mercantilist theory taught that all the wealth in the world had already been created. It was fixed and finite, and therefore the only way you could get richer would be by making somebody else poorer. But Smith did a scientific study of wealth, and he discovered that mercantilist theory didn't hold water. Smith found that new wealth was being added to the economy all the time. And if governments want to aid people in creating wealth for the nation, then the best thing that they can do is get out of people's way. Then nations will get all the things that come with national wealth: better living conditions, better health, better education, stronger national defense, infrastructure, more happiness, etc. Smith advocated a laissez-faire policy for governments, and laissez-faire means hands off. You can call this free enterprise, you can call this economic liberalism, but keep in mind, and we'll talk about this much more later, keep in mind that the word liberalism here did not mean what it means today. Today, we associate liberalism with lots of government regulation, lots of government intervention. But back then, liberalism meant the exact opposite. Adam Smith said that governments should be about doing three things. Number one, defending the nation from invasion. Number two, maintaining civil order through the police and the courts and the protection of civil rights. And number three, funding public works and other institutions that are simply not profitable for private enterprises to engage in. Adam Smith said that a government's economic priorities should be, number one, leveling the playing field for all players. Number two, encouraging healthy competition among these players. Number three, letting these economic players do what they do best. And number four, letting everyone pursue their own self-interest. What do we mean when we say self-interest? Well, let's say you're going to the butcher and the baker and the brewer. They're not giving you meat or bread out of charity. They're not doing it because they want to. They're doing it for their own self-interest. They expect to be paid for this. And so you have to pay them. And Adam Smith has this quote right here: "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest." According to Adam Smith, if a government succeeds at doing all these things, then the government can keep governmental regulations to a minimum. The government doesn't have to worry about fixing anything. The market will regulate itself as though an invisible hand were out there guiding it and controlling everything. And whatever decision this invisible hand made would be best for the economy. Adam Smith also did exhaustive studies on the ways that people produce goods. And Smith advocated the division of labor in a production system. In other words, if you organize a system so that you give the individual as narrow a range of tasks as possible, your efficiency will skyrocket. Everybody will get really good at doing the one little job that they have. Now, Adam Smith also acknowledged that doing the same thing over and over and over for hours and hours all day long was demoralizing, and he acknowledged that this was a real problem. Smith advocated also paying workers higher wages. Smith believed that no society can be flourishing and happy if the greater part of its citizens were poor and miserable. In fact, here's a quote from him right here. No society can surely be flourishing and happy of which the far greater part of the members are poor and miserable. Smith also acknowledged that competing employers would sometimes get together and conspire with each other to keep wages low. But Smith argued that this was an act of willful interference with the market. It was not an inherent fault in the market itself. Adam Smith argued that the biggest interferers of them all, besides the government, were these urban guilds. Smith's challenge to urban guilds was highly influential. The French, under Louis XV, tried to outlaw guilds. Now, they failed to do this due to popular protest. But the French tried the same thing again in 1791, and this time they succeeded. And we're going to hear more about that when we study the French Revolution.